Hello there, and welcome to Before the Thunder. You may be a little curious about the title. All the works narrated here can be considered works of flash fiction. Oftentimes, stories this short turn out to be a bit deeper than first glance allows. They can be read in a flash while the meaning comes crashing down. And if you've ever experienced a proper thunderstorm, you'll know that the flash always comes before the thunder. Now, before we get started, I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Fopunker. You can also call me Sean. And I'd like to thank you for taking a peek at the inaugural episode of this project. You may have noticed already that it's a little bit different than the typical Wattpad story. But therein lies the beauty. For as long as humans have been able to communicate, we've been telling stories. And before we could write those stories down, before alphabets and books and movies, there was the human voice. So without further delay, we'll get to the first tale, this one from M.S. Chavez, appropriately titled, Stories. The wide berth the patrons gave him piqued my interest. Wiry and worn, a scar across his left cheek, his skin pockmarked and leathery. He appeared common enough. But those tattoos, those were something else. His hands riddled with them. The open collar of his shirt revealed even more. All in black ink, intricate as fine lace. I rolled my shoulders back. I learned to drink, gamble, and fight in my brother's shadow. Yet, I had nothing on this fellow. "You waiting for someone?" I asked with my fool's confidence. He looked up. His eyes, disarmingly dark, pulled me into their depths. It was a tumultuous journey tossed upon the rocks of his emotions. Rage, disgust, and most prevalent and aching deep sorrow. He had nothing on me in that regard. He shook his head slowly, his eyes returning to his glass. No. Well, I could use some company. Would you mind? He waved his hand dismissively at the chair across from him. I settled down and caught the eye of the waitress. 2 shots of... I glanced at him. What would you prefer? Nothing. The waitress glanced from him to me and I shrugged. 2 shots of vodka, I said. I was courting the devil and I knew it. Suicidal, my brother always called me. He eyed me after the girl left. Do you have no sense? I laughed. Not really. I leaned forward. Those tattoos on your hands are really beautiful. I had to get a better look. His laugh was bitter. Beautiful. Hardly. You are a stupid girl. I grinned. I know. The shots arrived and I downed them quickly. I'd love to see the rest of them. I'm sure they tell quite a story. Not for your eyes, little sister. The tenor of his voice reverberated across my memories. I closed my eyes. I'd crawl into his bed, battered and bruised. That voice would tell me haunting folk tales. Then tell me one, I asked, yearning for that long ago, not-so-innocent time. One what? He looked up sharply. A story. The sort those tattoos would tell. Not all stories are born on the scars of strangers, of course. Some stories come from our own demons deep within us. In our next story, Julie Chapman shows us what happens when a soldier has to face his demons, personal and otherwise. So please sit back and enjoy our next tale, In the Name of Love. Sometimes, we must do terrible things in the name of love. I watch her sleep, my little love, her arm curled around that flaming dog in an embrace I wish she could share with me. The veil between our realms will not permit it, nor will it allow her to see me. Perhaps that's a blessing, for I am no longer the man she once called Dad. The blast that took my life also scarred me in death, disfigured me beyond recognition. I glance at the photo on her bedside table, the one Laura took of Sophie and me together the day before I left for Afghanistan. She looked so happy. We both did. No amount of training could have prepared me for that day. The day I heard the click and felt the sand move beneath my foot. They say your life flashes before your eyes, but I can assure you that's not what happens. At least, not in my case. The sand rose in slow motion around me. I watched with sadistic fascination as my boot disintegrated. The flesh flayed from my limb. I felt everything. Every molecule of sand and tissue as it broke away. The flames that followed the burst of sand seemed to stop before they engulfed me completely. Their heat seared as they flickered and licked at my skin. From their depths appeared a horned creature with breath hotter than hell itself.
"So young,"
it said.
"Your one desire is within my power to grant, if you wish it. But it comes at a price. Are you willing to serve me in exchange?"
Anything! The word left my throat in an agonized scream. I felt almost detached from it, as if someone else had said it. How could I know that the deal I made with that creature would guarantee my eternal damnation? Flames spewed from the creature's mouth with its triumphant roar, swallowing me and bathing me in blistering agony once more. When I opened my eyes, I stood at the sandy roadside devoid of my army-issue clothing. My comrades rose to their feet from where the blast had thrown them, and they stared through me to the ground behind. I turned, following their line of sight. In the bottom of the crater left by the road mine sat a limb, a left hand. It wasn't mine. Mine was still attached to my arm. I searched the faces of those left alive to determine whose it was. They were all accounted for. "Jesus," Bill rasped, sweeping the helmet off his head. "Where's the new kid?" His words confused me. I'm known as the new kid, and I was standing right in front of him at this point. He moved forward, straight through me, and I felt his body heat. It wasn't unpleasant. A little uncomfortable, perhaps, but not something I would go out of my way to avoid. I know he felt something, too, because he looked around with a frown creasing his forehead, then shook his head as if to clear away any unwelcome thought. He used a rag to pick something up from the ground beside a few nearby boulders, wiped it, studied it for a few seconds, and tucked it into his breast pocket. "Someone want to retrieve the kid's hand? Looks like that's all that's left of him," Bill asked as he patted the pocket he placed the item into. "Apart from his dog tags." The enormity of what I had agreed to became apparent within a matter of moments. The creature appeared beside Raz and made a gun shape with his hand, pointing it at his head. It showed its teeth with a fiery grin as it spoke.
"I don't care how you get it, but I want this one's soul."
"What?" I stuttered. "No, not Raz, please. He's my friend."
"Was your friend, you mean? Would you rather collect another soul? One a little closer to home, perhaps?"
With a snap of its claw-like fingers, we stood at the edge of a road. My road. Outside my neighbor's home. The street looked different than I remembered. Reasoning dictated that it was the sudden change from bright desert sun to the overcast late evening of the town several hundred miles away that affected my vision. Two burly men stood tall at the entrance as if on sentry duty. The creature motioned me forward with the wave of its hand. "Oh God, no. I can't. They went through too much when Becca disappeared last year. Please."
"As much as I like to hear you beg, I'm afraid we have a deal, and you will fulfill our bargain."
I strode toward the gate, the sentinels dropping to one knee as it passed. I couldn't help but follow it. Each of my footsteps mirrored those taken by the creature against my will. The house was an exact replica of my home a few doors along, bar the color of the walls. The photos of Becca had been taken down since my last visit. They used to grace every square inch of the wall and counter space. Everything looked so bare and neglected. Footsteps padding along the upper floor rang eerily loud in the otherwise quiet house, alerting us to a presence. Little Christine, who was the same age as Sophie, came barreling down the stairs in nothing but her nightgown. She stopped at the front door and turned to look straight at us. "Becca?" Christine asked. I could hear the hope in her voice. The creature waved. "No," I said with conviction. "I will not hurt a child."
Children's souls are not for harvesting. Come.
We left Christine sitting on the bottom step, staring wistfully at the front door. It was as we reached the top of the stairs that I heard her for the first time in over a year. Hiccuping sobs, interspersed with whimpers, drew me to the door that used to be Becca's room. Cowering in the corner of the bare room was Becca, or at least an apparition of her. The bruising and scarring as evident on her skin as it was on mine. I touched her outstretched hand and she showed me what happened the night she disappeared in a replay of events that, had I been alive, would have made me vomit. Something inside me snapped. I didn't hesitate a second longer in seeking out the woman I had trusted to watch over my angel while Laura and I were working. With great pleasure, I eased my specter hand between her ribs as she slept, and felt the utmost satisfaction as her eyes opened wide the moment I applied pressure to her heart.
That wasn't so hard.
How was it? Becca said from the doorway. It was a strange thing for her to say, and as I turned to look at her, she morphed into the creature. Its chuckles at my horrified expression when I realized that it had tricked me deepened in timbre until I felt them rather than heard them. It moved to the bedside as what I can only describe as smoke rose from Natalie's open mouth. It closed its eyes and inhaled the essence of her life force with a moan of unadulterated pleasure. Curiosity got the better of me and I couldn't help myself. I needed to get a closer look. The creature grabbed me by the back of the neck and held me so my face hovered over Natalie's. I refused to inhale. I didn't need to breathe after all. But when its claws grabbed onto my lower jaw, the pain made me gasp. One taste of the sweet nectar was all I needed. I inhaled deeply. The first thing I felt was warmth spreading its tendrils from my chest out to my limbs. It was a similar sensation to the one I had when Bill walked through me, yet at the same time it felt different. It made me feel alive. I too moaned as sensation after sensation flooded my nervous system. Every pleasure point titillated and teased to ecstasy. The creature flung me away much too soon. Once it had finished breathing her in, it turned to me with a satisfied smile. There were no flames to accompany its sigh of relief, nor did its eyes glow the way they had. They looked more glazed as if the creature were high. Sharp, yellowed claws held my jaw in a vice-like grip.
Exhale,
it demanded. As I did as instructed, it placed its mouth over mine and took the warmth from me in a kiss. A kiss of death.
Our deal,
it said,
is cemented. You may give one essence to your daughter a week, but only after you give me 3. Her illness will not return as long as you feed her life from your breath.
With my agreement to its terms, my choice of target was no longer limited to people the creature wanted. I was allowed to choose mine for myself, for my daughter. I didn't think about the names on the creature's list as people, more as a means to an end. No longer did I consider who they were, or what impact their death would have on others around them. I took their lives and I fed the demon their souls. My choices were a different matter. I discovered early on in my new career that souls of bad people, murderers, rapists, child molesters, were tainted with darkness, a bitter aftertaste, laced with violence as it entered my being. It appeared to affect Sophie's emotions too, and she became irritable at the drop of a hat. The day the new kitten reappeared with a broken neck was the day I realized how badly tarnished her own soul had become. That was when my targets changed. Instead of the killer, I stole life from the victims. I sought out the evangelists and the God-fearing people. In the dead of night, I'd stalk the streets and deprive the homeless of their warmth. Drunken revelers would lose their footing and fall from high places. Businessmen would suffer heart attacks. Drug addicts would overdose. Firemen would get trapped in burning buildings. And soldiers would step on landmines. I watch her sleep, my little love. Her arm curled around our dog in an embrace I wish she could share with me. The veil between our realms will not permit it, nor will it allow her to see me. Perhaps that's a blessing, for I am no longer the man she once called Dad. I am a killer of the innocent, a gatherer of souls determined to give nothing but the best to my daughter. Sometimes we must do terrible things in the name of love. Stories are as old as humanity itself. Some are even older. In our final tale, titled Troll Bridge by Gavin Wilson, we learn that not only have some tales been here before our time, but they're likely to remain long after. Daniel loved his job. Despite being clad in day-glow yellow for safety reasons, and presumably so he could be spotted from low Earth orbit, the fact he was wandering around rural Ireland on his own with nothing but the birds and trees for company spoke to his soul. He smiled happily in the dappled light and walked on through the narrow lane, the trees casting mellow filtered sunlight on the map in his hand. The dotted red line denoting the path of the proposed new dual carriageway ran alongside the old greenway on which he walked. The thin woods on his left would be removed for the construction. The thicker woods on the west side of the greenway would be kept to shield the road from the nearby Jamestown and placate the local green lobbyists. Consulting his plan once more, he noted a brook and wonderfully named Old Troll Bridge, and chuckled, muttering, "Shame I'm not a billy goat," to himself as he walked onwards. As he meandered on, the trees became more spaced out and massive, and he walked into a scene from a fairy tale. Water trickled over mossy boulders and past trees Tolkien himself would be proud to describe over the space of 4 chapters. Sunlight trickled into the clearing in dust-moted streams that lit patches of ground where gods should stand, or fauns should dance. In the center of the clearing stood a stone bridge arching over the stream. It was solidly built, yet elegant in a simplistic way, and barely wide enough for anything more than a horse and cart, but had obviously been built well and had stood the test of time. Daniel closed his mouth, which had been hanging open in wonder at the sight, and walked toward the bridge. He glanced at his watch and smiled in anticipation as his stomach growled in agreement. Walking over the bridge to the opposite bank, he reached to his shoulders, lifted his rucksack, and sat on a sunlit boulder by the bridge. Opening his plastic lunchbox, he poured a steaming hot coffee from his flask and sighed contentedly, closing his eyes to feel the sun on his skin. As he ate, he looked more closely at the bridge. In the sheltered recesses where erosion and time hadn't managed to smooth the stones, it was evident that at one point in its history it had been finely carved with whorls in the stonework and lines enhancing the shapes of the arch. The arch of the bridge was some 5 feet above the stream and had obviously been built to cope with a much higher flow than currently meandered under its stones. He finished his lunch and reached into his pack for the torch he kept in a pocket. He made his way carefully down the steep bank of the stream, the muddy slope making him proceed slowly. After a few seconds of painstaking descent, he stood by the arch, daylight in the woods clearly visible through the narrow span of the bridge. Flicking on his torch, he played the beam over the cut stones of the interior, his mouth framing a silent "wow" as the upper arch came into view. Whorls and patterns danced in the stone in ancient Gaelic style. Words were carved deep into the walls of the bridge above the normal water level, and he stooped under the keystone to get a better look. On one side, someone had taken great pains to carve a hideous figure in the limestone, all obtuse angles and disturbing planes. Flickering shadows danced and moved in the wan light of the torch, which chose that moment to flicker out. Despite the sunlight flickering through the trees a few yards away, the darkness was palpable, and the shadows deepened as he withdrew his face from the carving he'd been studying. "Bloody thing," he muttered, looking at the torch and tapping it on the stones. He sighed with disappointment and looked up into two orange eyes.
"You must pay the toll."
Daniel staggered backwards, smacked his head on the opposite curve of the arch, and sat heavily in the few inches of cold water flowing across the bed of the stream.
"You must pay the toll,"
the voice repeated in a rasp that spoke of stone and time.
"All who pass the bridge must pay the toll."
Oh shit. Daniel scrabbled frantically in his sodden pockets and came out with a piece of string, a penknife, and a handful of loose change. A stone arm detached from the shadows of the wall, the stone grating in protest but moving fast despite the noise. Stubby stone fingers lifted him from the stream and held him suspended with his face mere inches from the unblinking orange eyes. "Here," said Daniel, offering the dripping handful of pocket shrapnel to the creature in front of him.
"What is this?"
"Money. A knife, and string."
"This metal, not money. Money is gold or silver. This rubbish."
A stone hand dashed the contents of Daniel's pockets into the stream.
"You pay another way."
"How?" said Daniel, his heart hammering in his chest, the stone arm still rigid, the carbonaceous fingers twined in his clothing.
"I need sustenance,"
rasped the voice. You need food? I have food. It's in my pack. I could get it." Daniel broke off as the thing shook him so hard his teeth rattled.
"Stupid mortal! I do not eat. I am magical, not flesh and blood. Gold and silver are tradition, but what I need is sustenance. People must pass. People must feel. Must give me emotions."
"You live off emotion?" asked Daniel, his natural inquisitiveness starting to overcome his fright.
"I am stone. I do not feel, but I can feed off strong emotions. Only people have emotions, but no one passes this way. Not for a long time. Not until now." "Enough talk, human. You are scared. You have emotions. I will keep you here and feed on you."
No, wait, please," said Daniel desperately as the thing's mouth opened to reveal hollow stone fangs. "I can bring you thousands of humans to feed on." The stone beast paused and moved its fangs away from Daniel's neck to regard him from a few inches away.
"Why do you lie to me, immortal? Accept your fate and be a man."
"I'm not lying," said Daniel. I can, but you must promise not to hurt anyone. You said you can feed off emotions, yes?" he continued as the thing nodded. "Well, if there are thousands, surely you only need a small amount of succor from each person."
"Human, no man has passed this way for 100 years or more. You humans are few."
"A great deal has changed in 100 years. There are millions of humans across the country now. I can bring you thousands of people who will pass close by, but you must let me go."
A deal, then.
Rasped the creature.
But to make sure you come back, human, I think a demonstration of power is in order.
The thing leant down and bit into Daniel's shoulder. A scream of agony ripping from a man's throat as his shoulder froze into stone. It let go of his shirt and watched as Daniel scrabbled around in the water, crying in pain, moving towards the light from the sun. Unseen under his fluorescent sight jacket, gray spread in a toxic rush along his arm until the entire shoulder, arm, and hand had frozen into carbonate stillness. Daniel sat panting in the water, sunlight shining on his frozen hand. The pain had gone for a moment, but sweat stood out on his forehead, and his pale face looked up at the creature who was standing free of its stone surround, framed by the arch.
You have given me terror, human. I have power once more. Think of this as a demonstration.
It waved a hand and Daniel's arm unfroze, life creeping back into his arm. As Daniel watched, the gray stain moved from his hand and coalesced into a stone ring on his little finger.
That is your reminder, mortal. You have made a promise. The ring makes it binding. Do you understand?
"Yes," stammered Daniel. "I will bring your succor, but it might take years to get it all sorted out."
I have the patience of stone, human. I can wait.
"I'm sorry, love, but I really need to go." The woman in the passenger seat glared at her husband. The traffic jam had remained unmoving for over an hour, and the man had been getting more and more agitated. "You're a man. You're designed to pee alongside roads, so I suggest you get on with it," she snapped. "But it's broad daylight." "Then jump over the barrier and nip over into those woods over there. Use your brain, man." All right. No need to get snippy." The man opened the car door, glanced at the interminable queue in front of him, and walked over to the metal crash barrier forming the edge of the new dual carriageway. Some time later, he returned to the car with a smile on his face. A smile which faded as his wife glared at him through the window. "Where the bloody hell have you been?" she hissed at him. "Oh, sorry, love. It's an interesting little spot over there. There's a pretty little stream, some wonderful trees, and an old stone bridge. It's... Oh, great. So you get to have a pee and do some sightseeing, and I get to sit here and listen to country and western for 20 minutes. Huh? Country and western? Yes. Just to add to the general misery of this godforsaken spot, the radio's gone wrong, and all I can get is some idiot wailing about some woman running off with a cowboy from Texas. Oh, jeez, turn it off." The man fiddled fruitlessly with the radio for a few more minutes and gave up. He was going to tell his wife what else he'd seen, but she didn't seem too receptive to his architectural predilections. Flicking on his phone, he looked at the pictures he'd taken of the bridges. The old stone bridgeway was idyllic, a wonderfully constructed piece of stonework of ancient design. The new bridge over the stream on which they sat was hidden under the endless bitumen highway. Only chance had led him to see both old and new. He flicked back to the last image. It was always good to see a modern designer do something different, and the carvings on the new bridge, although slightly odd, were a welcome addition to an otherwise nondescript bridge. The troll opened his eyes, their orange glow visible in the gloom under the new bridge. He smiled. Arguments and vitriol spilled over from the stationary traffic above. Misery, anger, and frustration coruscated through the air, filling his senses and strengthening him. He was rich with power, crackling with energy. It was good to be so alive after so long being dormant, and he knew who to thank. He glanced over at the frozen stone figure of Daniel on the opposite wall. It would take a while, But once his energy was high enough, he would complete the transformation, and he would have company. A new troll. But he could wait.
Stone is patient.
And that brings us to the end of our first episode of Before the Thunder. I hope you've enjoyed listening to these stories as much as I've enjoyed reading them. If you've enjoyed what you've heard, please follow the links below and show the authors some appreciation. And be sure to vote and leave comments below as well. I'd love the feedback and any suggestions people may have regarding future episodes. So please be in touch. And thanks again for checking out Before the Thunder. Until next time.